All right. For those of you who are new, today uh, our format is basically Dr. Baker is going to present, and after which we will have about 20 to 30 minutes of question and answer after he's done. So without any further ado, I'm going to give the time to Dr. Baker.
Welcome to Archaeology of the Exodus. I am Ellis Baker Jr., and again, it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. Tonight, we are going to explore the hippopotamus pool story, and in the process, try to answer the question of where Israel lived while they were in Egypt. Before we do, though, I'd like to start with a quote. This is from the last king of the 17th dynasty, the last king of the Second Intermediate period, named Kamos. He was a king down at Thebes. They didn't call it Thebes. Thebes is a Greek name. They called their city Waset. So but it's at Thebes. And he said, "Why do I contemplate my strength while there is one great man in Avaris and another in Cush, sitting united with an Asiatic and a Nubian, while each man possesses his slice of Egypt?" Remember last night we talked about the kingdoms, the old, middle, and new kingdom as a time of unification where there was one king over the entire country of Egypt. And the intermediate periods, particularly the first and second, as being times where there's multiple kings ruling. And this is from the second intermediate period. He's the last king of that period, and he's complaining because there's an Asiatic person, somebody from Palestine area, who is ruling in the northern part of Egypt, and he's in alliance with a Nubian in northern Sudan, just south of Egypt. Actually, it's modern Egypt still today, that part of it. And they are in alliance against him, and he's actually Egyptian, and he's complaining that he's Egyptian and he's not ruling his entire country. That's the story we're going to get into a little bit later. Last night, Pastor mentioned that I work at Karnak Temple in Thebes, and this is me here. This is the great hypostyle hall portion. I'm just on the outside of it. We're working on the wall. I think I might have another slide another night on explain the actual wall, but this is the Merenptah wall. He's the son of Ramses the Great, and he had some battles. He has a big stele that mentions Israel, and it also mentions Ashkelon, the Philistine city, and a couple other cities. And those cities are on this wall. And it's possible that to my right in this picture, outside of the picture, there's some people that may be Israelites. We don't know Hebrews. And so I'm actually working on the Hittite treaty between Ramses and the Hittite king. There's 36 lines of text, and I'm trying to sort out what is a hieroglyph and what is damaged. And so that's why I'm using the mirror there to get that raking light at Karnak. We mentioned the book last night. I didn't get a chance to show it to you. I should have taken it off the shelf, but just in case you wanted to see what it looks like, this is a picture of it. It's a thick book, so if you fall asleep reading it like this, it may fall and break your nose. I had one of the people who read it told me that happened to her. She didn't break her nose though. It just fell and made it sore. I woke her up. So don't read it while you're sleeping, laying in bed. If you choose to get it at all. So let's go into the presentation. Where did Israel live? We're going to start just reviewing real quickly the different periods. Remember, we were talking last night about the different kingdoms and the different dynasties, those numbers of the different dynasties. The Exodus took place somewhere in the New Kingdom. We'll talk about that even in more detail tomorrow night. But even tonight we will. So our story tonight is going to take place at the end of the second intermediate period, the 17th dynasty. That's where the king Kamos, that just mentioned his quote a minute ago. He was a king, the 17th dynasty, and then 18th dynasty comes right after, which is a possibility for Exodus, and then also 19th. The three theories we mentioned about chronology last night, that was the main point of last night, was to establish these three chronologies. So you understand when you're listening to National Geographic or some Christian organization on YouTube, they're probably working in this model right here. If you're listening to an Adventist archaeologist or a few other Christian conservative archaeologists dealing with this topic, they may be in either this camp or this camp. Many of our Adventist scholars are in this one. I and a few others are in this one here in the middle, as I believe Dr. Horn was as well years ago. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of the three different options. I'm dealing with this one because of many different factors, and you're going to understand some of those tonight, why I think that middle one is probably correct. All right, so to begin with, to answer the question, we need to also start with a question. I'll ask you, I don't know if anybody is able to jump on and respond. But I was asked this question when I was in a geography class in Oklahoma City years and years ago, Oklahoma State University. Geography professor asked us, what direction do all the rivers in the world flow? Does anybody know the answer? Every river in the world flows in this direction. Anybody want to be bold enough to jump on and answer? I was thinking in my mind, the Nile flows from south to north. The Amazon goes from west to east. Mississippi north to south. But they all flow in the same direction. Nobody?
Usually south.
Usually south, but there's some like the Nile that goes to the north. It stumped me for a while. I appreciate you jumping on. It stumped me for a while, and then somebody else spoke up, and as soon as they said it, it was obvious to me. What my geography professor was trying to get at was topography, and the direction he wanted us to understand was that all rivers flow downhill. And it's a very simple kind of silly question to kind of get to, but it's very profound, because when we're talking about the Nile and life in Egypt revolved around the Nile, it's vital really that we understand that the Nile River flows south to north, which means as you're traveling from north to south, you are going uphill generally. And if you're going from the south to the north, you're usually going generally downhill. And that's going to become really important as we read the biblical text. And so we'll come to that a little bit later. So keep that in the back of your mind as we talk about Egypt, because Egypt really was a country, a long, thin country. That green on that map, that's the fertile land around the Nile. Everything that's kind of that pale color, yellow, like maybe white, pale white, whatever, off-white, that's the desert. So it's mostly desert. And so Egypt really was properly, in the ancient Egyptian mind, it was just the green that you see on the map. Everything else was not Egypt. It was foreign, dangerous land. Egyptians controlled much of it, but they didn't consider it to be Egypt. So that green is really important. That's where people live. And so you really can see the kind of the downhill to uphill kind of flow. The river itself flowed from south to north. Because of this, when we talk about Upper and Lower Egypt, we're talking about north and south, and not in that order, the other opposite order. In fact, in hieroglyphs, this is the King Aa Keper Enre, and he's introduced, it's his throne name. He's introduced by this Nesut Biti kind of combination, which is meaning the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, and then it mentions his throne name, and that's quite common in hieroglyphs. When it means Upper and Lower Egypt, of course, it means that the Nile Valley, all the way to the Aswan Dam, which is the first cataract in the Nile River. As you're going up the river, it's the first cataract you'll meet. That from there to basically where the delta kind of spreads out, that's called Upper Egypt, and that was the sign of this sedge plant. The bee, this wasp-looking biting fly creature, was of Lower Egypt, represented Lower Egypt, where that was quite common. In fact, they even represented these things in the crowns the king wore. Last night I mentioned the Narmer palette. You saw on the front he had this bowling pin kind of looking white crown. Here's some images of it. Here's an image right here in hieroglyphs. Actually, this is the two protectress goddesses. This is Nekbet, the vulture goddess, and she's wearing that crown, the crown the king wears. This is a Tutankhamun statue where he's wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. That's the Nile Valley. Lower Egypt has this red crown. We saw the Narmer palette also have that last night, and it was protected by Wajet, the cobra goddess. You see her over here wearing the red crown. Here's another statue of Tutankhamun, this time wearing the red crown. You see another iconography image over here. I don't know if that's Seti or Ramses, one of the two. Together, here's the Narmer palette from last night. You can see how sometimes those two can be then combined to look something like this. You see it here on one of the temples in Karnak. One of the columns there, the white crown inside of the red crown, meaning it's a unified country at that time. They're the king of both Upper and Lower Egypt. The unified Egypt, again, just to remind you, is mostly the kingdoms. Of course, the early dynastic and the late period also were very unified. Third intermediate period to some extent. But all these theories, all the different positions we're at in the history, Middle Kingdom was unified, New Kingdom was unified, Second Intermediate period wasn't. But no matter which of these theories you're in, you'll recognize, I pointed out last night, that the Hebrews were actually in Egypt in the Second Intermediate period, when the story I'm about to tell you took place. So the Second Intermediate Period began with the end of, I guess, middle part of the 13th dynasty in Egypt, which is the end of the Middle Kingdom. And the 13th dynasty, while they were ruling, some Asiatic Hyksos, these are people from Palestine area, they were called Hyksos. It's been wrongly translated as shepherd kings. They weren't necessarily shepherds, but they came through, they called them Hyksos. They came in and they had chariots, they had compound bows, they brought horses to Egypt for the first time, they had battle axes, and they were able to take control of the northern part of the country of Egypt, the lower kingdom. And they pushed the 13th dynasty up the river to the south. And 13th dynasty eventually became 16th dynasty. These are Egyptian princes, where the 15th dynasty are the Asiatic. By the way, they're Semitic, so they're ethnically related to the Hebrews, although they aren't necessarily Hebrews themselves. The term for Hebrew in ancient Egypt is Aperu, and we see Aperu or Aamu. Aamu is an Asiatic person entering Egypt. This is during the Middle Kingdom. This is you can see here on the tomb of Beni Hassan. It's actually drawn better here, but you can see it right there. They're kind of all dressed up, and these are what the Asiatic people wore. The kind of Hebrew Semitic people wore these very colorful robes, and that will remind you of the story of Joseph, because Joseph, as a prince, was given that colorful robe, and that robe of many colors, we call it in Genesis, meaning that he was Jacob's choice to be his firstborn, to be his successor. He was the prince, and that's why he was given that. And that his brothers, of course, understood that from the culture, and we see that culture illustrated very well here. And you can see the Asiatic people with the pointed beards, the way their beards are, it's very common. The Egyptians looking very much different. And you can see the same thing over here with the beards kind of pointed. And these are all captives, symbols of captives, Asiatic people with very colorful robes, illustrating that they're all princes. People are important. So these Asiatic people are Semitically related to the Hebrews. Well, during the 15th dynasty, a king named Cayenne, it's pronounced the same way as the pepper, but it's not the pepper. He's a Cayenne, and we don't have a whole lot from him, but we do know that he was able to seize Egypt all the way. He gained control of all of Egypt all the way down to Gebalion, which in part due to a famine. And then the 13th dynasty and 16th dynasty retreated. We don't know what happened to it. Maybe it disappeared. There's not a whole lot of records of this time from the famine period. But sometime shortly after that, the 16th dynasty became the 17th. Maybe it was the same family. Maybe it was a different family. We're not 100% sure. But they gained control of the area around Waset, or we call it Thebes, there in the south, where that red dot is at. And they controlled a good piece of land around that, up and down the river. Meanwhile, the 15th dynasty ruled basically in peace for quite a while from the north. They ruled in their city of Avaris in the north. Over time, the 17th dynasty, these are native local Egyptians, they got stronger and stronger and stronger, and their territory that became more loyal to them got bigger and bigger, until towards the end of the 15th dynasty, a king named Apepi in the north was ruling, and a king named Second Enre. He was the second one with that name. Throne name was Ta'a. He ruled in the south. And so this is the time when the story took place, because Apepi sent a messenger upriver to talk to Second Enre. And this is what the messenger said. This is from a stele in the, right now it's in the Luxor Museum. And when the messenger of the king of Pepi, life, prosperity, health, this is how they said, long live the king, so to speak. When the messenger of the king of Pepi, life, prosperity, health, reached the prince of the southern city. So it doesn't call Second Enre a king, it calls him a prince. He was then taken into the presence of the prince of the southern city. Then one, that's Second Enre Ta, said to the messenger of king of Pepi, life, prosperity, health, why have you been sent to the southern city? Wherefore have you come journeying here? The messenger then told him, it is King of Pepi, life, prosperity, health, who has sent me to you in order to say, let there be a withdrawal from the Hippopotamus pool, which lies at the east of the city, because they don't let sleep come to me, either in the daytime or at night, for the noise of them is in the citizens' ears. Then the prince of the southern city became stupefied for so long a while that he became unable to render a reply to the messenger of King of Pepi, life, prosperity, health. That's from a papyrus, also copied in the story of the stele. The reason what he was saying was he wasn't saying that the that people in the north has some kind of love for hippopotami more than any other creature necessarily, but they understood what was happening. There was a ritual happening. I think this is from Temple of Edfu, a little further south from Thebes, but it shows here Horus, the falcon god, spearing or stabbing the hippopotamus while he's being guided by other gods that are watching over him. Because every year the hippopotamus represented Seth, the god who was the brother of Osiris, who killed Osiris, and then Horus, the son of Osiris, took the throne, battled with Seth for some time, and eventually killed Seth. And then Horus took over the entire country of Egypt as the king. Every king in Egypt was considered himself to be Horus. Every king was the falcon god Horus personified. When he died, he became Osiris. But as long as he was living, he was Horus. So when Sekenenre killed the sacred hippopotami, who symbolized Seth and Horus's victory over, what Sekenenre was saying was that he was king of Egypt. And Apepi understood that. And so Apepi complained that the hippopotami were making too much noise. They were being killed. In other words, he was hearing rumors that Sekenenre was calling himself king. And that's why he called him prince. It was very clear to call him prince. It's a very absurd thing to say, though, if you think about it. 350 miles as the crow flies, so to speak, to Avaris. 350 miles is like from Ottawa, Illinois to Columbus, Ohio. So it's kind of like you guys in Ottawa, those of you who live in Ottawa, saying that the people in Columbus, maybe the Buckeye fans, are making so much noise at the stadium you can't sleep. It's an absurd claim. There's no way you can possibly hear that far. Obviously, Apepi wanted to fight, and Sekenenre understood that, and so there was going to be war, and so it was war. Apepi marched to the south. Sekenenre marched north to meet them in battle, and Apepi won. We have Sekenenre's mummy. You can see it's been stabbed by a battle axe in the head. He's actually the different wounds. The actual mummy itself is quite graphically grotesque. He was. It's in the. If you get a chance to visit Egypt, there's a new museum called the Egyptian Museum of the National Civilization Museum of Egypt. Visit that one. It's a civilization museum. All the mummies are there, and you can go see them for free. It's part of the ticket getting in. And Sekenenre is there, along with every candidate for Pharaoh of the Exodus is in that museum. So as you walk through, you'll see whoever the Pharaoh of the Exodus was. You'll see him. Even if you don't know which one it was, you'll see him. Anyway, Sekenenre died because the Hyksos had better weapons, basically. And so Apepi was able to get a stalemate, and then Kamos is the one I quoted at the very beginning. Kamos is pushed south. He was complaining about the Asiatic in the north and the Nubian in the south, and so he marched south to attack the Nubians who were coming up behind in this pincer movement. Kamos won that. He pushed the Nubians back upriver, and then he turned around to fight Apepi. The Great Hyksos War is mentioned here on this stele I was talking about a minute ago at the Luxor Museum. So if you get a chance to visit the Luxor Museum, it's a small museum, but it's a beautiful museum, very well done. And Kamos his stele is right there. He actually succeeded. He went north, pushed Apepi all the way back to Avaris, but then in the process of the battle, it looks like Kamos died because he was succeeded by his brother Amosis. Amosis is also in the Luxor Museum, so if you get a chance to see that museum, you also visit, you'll see him as well. Amosis was the last king of the 17th dynasty and the first king of the 18th, because he actually succeeded in pushing Apepi out in the north. He forced all the Asiatics to leave. However, it looks like this forcing out of the Asiatics maybe was a treaty of some kind. I'll come back to that in a little bit. He also went back to the south. He made sure the Nubians were not going to come attack. And basically, in that process, Amosis succeeded in unifying all of Egypt. And because he unified all of Egypt, Manetho, who came up with these dynasties, maybe from a tree, the tree of life in Abydos, potentially is where he got this idea of the dynasties. But anyway, that's where we get the dynasties from him. he changed the 17th dynasty to 18th dynasty, even though it's the same family, same guy, and the new kingdom began at that point. This is the beginning of the new kingdom, with the Asiatics back in Palestine area, and the Nubians back in the south. You can actually see on a cane, this is actually a cane where it has a captive. You can see his hands bound behind his back, a captive Nubian in the south being subjected. And of course, you've already seen these tiles of the Asiatics. So this was something the Egyptians did, a lot of symbolic representations of their enemies being bound. They believed that there was something called prescribed reality, where if they made an image of it or a symbolic, even inscribed it on a wall, it's as if it would happen in perpetuity because it was made to last. Well, okay, so that entire story happened. The Hebrews were actually in Egypt while that happened. And so no matter if they came in during the Middle Kingdom or they came in sometime during the Second Intermediate period, regardless of which, it doesn't matter. They were here at the end of it, and they were in Egypt at that time. But there's also something else to keep in mind. As we talk about geography tonight and topography, it's important to realize that the capital cities of Egypt were not always in the same place. During the Middle Kingdom, during this theory position, it has them come in the Middle Kingdom. It was in a different location, the capital. So we just got done talking about the Second Intermediate period being at Avaris in the north and Thebes in the south. Those are two capitals, the north and the south capital. But during the Middle Kingdom, before that, the capital city was here at Lisht. It was south of Giza. Here's the big pyramids and the Sphinx are here at Giza. And Saqqara, Dashur, here's Memphis, mentioned that last night. That's south of that there. That's where the capital was, about 120 miles south, if you want to keep track of the miles. So that's kind of the political situation. Now let's see if we can figure out where the Hebrews actually were living. What does the Bible say about where they lived? We turn to the book of Genesis, chapter 45, verse 10, and we read, "You shall dwell in the land of Goshen." This is Joseph talking to his brothers. "You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children, your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have." So wherever they lived, they had to live near to Joseph. So Goshen, the land of Goshen, where they moved into, was near an administrative center. By the way, there is a Goshen in Israel, but it's a different Goshen. I think probably the name Goshen is an Asiatic term for the land they were living in. But what does the word near mean? Well, we find out if we keep reading in Genesis 46, 28 to 29, it says, "Then he," that's Jacob, Israel, "sent Judah before him." So this is when they're actually moving the family from Canaan area, the Palestine area, down into Egypt. And he sent Judah ahead. Remember, Judah had been there before, but Jacob hadn't been there before. So he sent Judah ahead to Joseph to point out the way before him, the way to Goshen, because this is where Joseph said they were going to live. And they came to the land of Goshen. So Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. So it says that he went up to Goshen. Again, you're answering your own minds, but what direction is up in Egypt? Up is uphill. Uphill can only be south. So Goshen has to be south of wherever it was. So these are the three options for the administrative centers. And in Egypt, either in the Middle Kingdom or Second Intermediate period, one of those two time periods when the Hebrews came in, we don't know which one. The one theory says they came in the Middle Kingdom. Two theories say they came to the Second Intermediate period. So those are the three options for capitals. And near means uphill. So it has to be to the south of these administrative centers. So in one of these areas is where we're going to find the land of Goshen. What else can we figure out? We're at the time of the Exodus. So if we look at the Exodus, we're going to leave the question for where they were when they came into Egypt. We'll leave that to a side for a minute. We'll come back to it. Let's go to the Exodus. Let's go to the other side of it. When they left, where were they living? All three positions say the New Kingdom was when they left. The first and second positions say the 18th dynasty, early 18th dynasty. The third position here on the right says 19th dynasty. So let's see what we can learn about these dynasties. Here's the name of the kings, the last kings of the 17th dynasty. You recognize Second Enmetau. He's the one who had that strange hippopotamus pool message that came. He died fighting the Hyksos, as I told you. Kamoses, who we quoted at the very beginning, who also died, his son of Second Enre, probably. He died also fighting Hyksos. And then Ahmoses, who's the first king named Ahmoses, became the king. and he's the one who succeeded. Under Amenhotep, large-scale slavery began. So no matter which position you believe, whether you believe the Exodus took place in the 18th dynasty or the 19th dynasty, everyone agrees that they were put into slavery under Amenhotep, the first Amenhotep, because that's when large-scale slavery began. There was slavery before in the Middle Kingdom, but it was very localized. It was small scale. It was more like household slaves. Same thing in the Second Intermediate period. They didn't really have a lot of foreign slaves that are brought in as large-scale slaves. But large-scale slavery began then. After him was a king named Thutmose. Then his son, also named Thutmose, the second one. Then Hatshepsut during her reign. 2 store cities were built to supply the military. That's going to be important. Third Thutmose took over after her, kind of joint rule for a while, and then after her. And then second Amenhotep, fourth Thutmose. Just kind of give you an idea of where they were. So we look at these 2 military supply cities of Hatshepsut during that time period. These are 2 cities that were built. One was built at Tala-Rataba. It was called Piatum. And the other was at Tel Adaba, Cantir, that's Avaris. And it was called Avaris or Peru-Nefer. These were the 2 supply cities. The one in the north, Avaris, where the Hyksos capital was. This is, by the way, the delta, if you're looking at it. Avaris is right here. And near where it says Cantir, just a little bit south of that. Avaris was there. And this is actually to supply the military when they wanted to go up along the coast and go into Canaan along the coast. If they wanted to go into Transjordan or into the Sinai region, they would go through this Wadi Tumilat area and get supplied. The military would be supplied from here. And this is where they would go off into the desert over to the east. So those are 2 military supply cities that kind of guarded the fort, guarded the eastern frontier, so to speak, and supplied the military. And they were built here in the early 18th dynasty. For the longest time, we thought, this is, by the way, this is probably one of the greatest successes of Egyptian archaeology and the method of discovering and actually doing excavation. For the longest time, we thought that the capital city of Avaris, Ramses later on, was at Tanis, because we found material from that city there. And so the longest time, everyone thought, that's where it was at. In fact, some old biblical maps actually show Tanis as being that city. In fact, if you ever watch the Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, they go to Tanis to try to find the Ark of the Covenant. So you kind of get this idea that's where it was at. But we actually know that those blocks of stones were actually reused from Tel Cantir, this Tel Adaba area here. So they actually built the city here, and then later on moved it to Tanis, and that's why the archaeologists found those blocks there. They actually were reused blocks. Same thing with Tela-Rataba, the city of Piatum. It was here, and they were reused at Tel el-Maskuta, a little bit to the east, and that's when archaeologists came and found it. They thought that was a city for a while before they realized they were reused blocks from Tela-Rataba. So those were the 2 military supply cities in the early 18th dynasty, and the blocks were reused later on, and that's why some biblical maps put them at those places. You might even read in some articles about Tanis or Tel el-Maskuta. Don't be upset with them. They're just using the old data, and they haven't been kept up to speed on what archaeologists have found out. We've now known this, by the way, for probably 10 years or maybe 2 decades, maybe even where the real cities are actually located, because we actually found the inscriptions of the names and actually the actual foundation trenches and everything. That's why we know. So is it possible the Hebrews had something to do with building the 2 supply cities? What do we know archaeologically? So let me show you the archaeology a little bit. This is at Tel Adaba. If you're looking at this bottom image right here, you see these squares. These are all artificial squares. Archaeologists dig in square. We call them literally squares. They're usually 5 by 5 meters. Sometimes they can be a little different dimensions depending on the archaeologist and what method they're using. And we always leave about 1 meter of dirt in between the 2 squares as kind of a control, so we can see the dirt layers, stratigraphy, and kind of help us with the dating. And so that's what you're seeing here with these lines going up and down. The green lines that you see are all the actual city walls. So the cities are not always oriented north and south, east and west. They're actually on a little bit of an angle, which actually helps us quite a bit to see those beneath or going between the bulks and computer scares. Matthew Bitok has been digging for quite a while. And one thing he found out very interesting. Remember we talked about how in the hippopotamus represented Seth. While the Hyksos, they worship Seth here at Avaris. And in fact, they worship Seth as their god from Canaan, their god's name was Baal, Baal Zephon. In fact, in Exodus 13 and 14, you'll find, maybe 14, you're going to find the name Baal Zephon as one of the markers for the Exodus route. They worship Baal Zephon at this site, and they combine that god with the god Seth. They put them together as one god. And so that was another reason they were quite upset about Second Enemy killing the hippopotami. Anyway, that was here. And what Manfred Bitak found that was very surprising was that it looks like the Hyksos didn't leave in a fight. We know there was a battle. It was the Great Hyksos War. We talked about that just a minute ago. And yet the evidence shows that they left peaceably. There must have been some kind of a peaceful treaty signed. Maybe they had laid siege for quite a while and realized that they were never going to get the Hyksos out of there. And so they signed some kind of a treaty to let the Hyksos leave peaceably with no sign of destruction after that great battle. So you look at this one right here. This is the city of Avaris. You can see it's actually on some hills. These are actually at this time, all cities in Egypt, and especially in the Delta, were actually on raised kind of like sandbars. We call them, in modern times, they call them turtle backs, as if there's a turtle kind of raising its shell out of the water. And so it's this kind of raised up land out of the water. And they lived on those, and the water went around. So it's basically an island. So Avaris was an island. This is why it was going to be very difficult for them to lay siege and get them out. But one thing that made Avaris such an important city, and why it became so strong during the Second Intermediate period, and then later in the early 18th dynasty, is this harbor right here in the middle. You come down upriver or downriver. You can go right to the Mediterranean with it. You can do shipping all the way out into Crete and Cyprus and all these Mediterranean locations, different parts of the Levant area, and you can bring your ships and dock them in this nice little harbor here, and even have this back channel back here for traffic. So they have a lot of trade, and it became a very prosperous city. But the problem with Egypt is that there's always going to be some flood. Every year there's going to be a flood, and that flood brings this rich silt that kind of goes over the whole land. It fertilizes the land and makes it very, very fertile, so they could grow a lot of crops. But that silt also raises the riverbed up a little bit every year. And so eventually this whole harbor silted up to a degree that they couldn't bring ships in anymore. And so Avaris was abandoned early in the 18th dynasty during the reign of second Amenhotep, who was the son of the third Tutmosis. So even though Hatshepsut and Tutmosis built these two supply cities, these military camps here at Avaris and also at Tel Rataba at Piatum, they were abandoned not long after that. But we do have now this abandonment period, and so Avaris was abandoned, and the capital then went. Always the capital was at Thebes. It never stopped being at Thebes. There's a northern capital, a southern capital, but the southern capital became the only capital for quite some time. Amenhotep's early in his reign, it was abandoned. He went down, and it wasn't until later on that somebody went back. In fact, if we look at the list here, here's the same list you saw earlier. Here's Hatshepsut, the two supply cities. 2 kings later, Amenhotep, the second one, the first one was large-scale slavery. The second one abandoned the capital during his reign. And if you look, there he is again here, just for sake. It wasn't until here's Tutankhamun here, the one that for the famous boy that was found, his tomb was found by Howard Carter in the early 1900s. 2 kings later was Horemheb. Horemheb was the last king of the 18th dynasty. He was a general of the army, and he went back and reestablished the harbor at Avaris, built some walls, didn't do a whole lot. When he died, he didn't have a son. He actually appointed his general. General's name was Ramses, who was a very old man at the time, to be the king. He only reigned for a short time. And then his son Seti, that'd be the first Seti, the great Seti, became a king. And his family, the Ramside family, was actually from the Avaris area. And so they were very happy to go back and reestablish the capital there. And so he went back and started he had a summer home there, and started building another city, a new capital city, about 5 kilometers north of Avaris, downriver a little bit. And then the second Ramses, his son, Ramses the Great, became the next king and finished the city, named it after himself very humbly. And then Merenptah was his son. He's the one who mentioned the Israel and the Israel stele. He's the one I'm working on the wall at Karnak, Merenptah. Just to kind of get orientate yourselves. So Manfred Bitak worked also at Tel Kantir, about 5 kilometers south of Tel Adaba at Varis, and discovered the city of Ramses, P. Ramses there. And so this, you kind of can see the way it was kind of laid out with the different temples here. There's a military bases here. You see where all the military is at. Military is also here. And so there's a lot of military there as well. And they used it also as a supply city at that time as well. And so if you kind of overlap the map, this is where it looks. Tel Adaba and Tel Kantir back to back. And here is Tel Retaba over here. So let's read from Exodus what the Israelites were building. It says in Exodus 1:8-11. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people, the children of Israel, are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. Okay, so we know that they built these two supply cities, and we know they got put into slavery at first Amenhotep, so it makes sense that the two supply cities that were built, that they were building, were probably the ones that Hatshepsut and finished there at Tel Adaba and at Tel Retaba. In fact, the name Piatum is often just P-Tum with the A left off. That's how we actually pronounce it. P-Tum is the god Atum, but it's a P-Tum. And that's actually pronounced Pithum. And we're very, very convinced that that is Pithom on the Bible. And it was a supply city for the military at this time. And we know that Ramses, the city of Ramses, was named here. The Tel Adaba, Tel Kantir city was also named Ramses. So we're very, very confident that we know exactly where those two cities were located, either in the 18th dynasty or the 19th dynasty, earlier, or either one of them. And the in-between period, it was actually abandoned. So if the Exodus took place in the early 18th dynasty, it took place here at Tel Adaba. It was 19th dynasty under Ramses. It would have been at Tel Kantir, just 5 kilometers. It's basically the same city. You can actually see them from each other. It's not that far away. Same place, which means the land of Goshen needs to be in between, because if they're building these two supply cities, they have to live somewhere close. And so Goshen has to be somewhere in this area. We would have to guess. This is desert over here. It makes sense that they'd be living somewhere where there's actually pasture land for their flocks. So probably somewhere there at the time of the Exodus. But can we be a little bit more exact? Let me tell you a little bit about Wadi Tumlat, where the city of Pithom is located. Here you go. You kind of look and see a satellite image of this instead of a line drawing. The city of Ramses here, Tel Adaba, Tel Kantir is here, Avaris city. And then the city of Pithom, P-Atum, is here. This is the Wadi Tumlat. It's a small wadi. It's where the military went out to go into the desert, into the Sinai, and then over into the Jordan area if they wanted to, or to go into the mining areas south into Sinai to mine. They would go through and supply here at the frontier fortress of Tel Retaba. There's two kind of narrowings in this wadi. A wadi is a big valley, by the way. So the desert on the north and the south, and a narrowing here, and there's a narrowing here. You can see that it's wider on both sides. And that narrowing was a good place to put a city for military purposes. In ancient times, in the pre-dynastic period, which shortly after the flood, actually there was a river that flowed, a part of the Nile actually flowed through the Wadi Tumlat into what are now the Bitter Lakes, where the Suez Canal is, and actually all the way down into the Red Sea. We have core sampling, so we know that that's what happened at that time. But like we said, when there was flooding over the years, eventually it silted up. And that silting up ended up separating, so no longer did that river flow. At the time of the New Kingdom, there was not a river all the way through there. But that's why you have the fresh water and the salt water mixing together to make this kind of these bitter lakes here that we kind of have. The eastern zone looks very much like desert during the New Kingdom, during the time of the Exodus story. This would be the east of Telamascuta. During the Exodus time, Second Intermediate period and early New Kingdom, the central zone was very good for pasturing flocks. You don't see there's a road here. You don't really see, but over on the side is actually quite nice for pasturing flocks and herds. Not very good for agriculture. There's not enough water for agriculture, but flocks and herds is perfect for that. And then to the west, the western zone of the Wadi Tumlat is just like every other part of Egypt in the Delta area. It's very, very, very lush, lots of water, and perfect for agriculture, that sort of thing. Well, there was Carol Redmond did her dissertation on pottery shards. It sounds to me like a very boring kind of a dissertation, but she did pottery shards survey of the whole Wadi Tumlat area. And what she discovered is that during the Second Intermediate Period, the time when the Hyksos were ruling at Avaris, many Asiatic people were coming into Egypt. We already knew that from history, but now we have evidence because we have Asiatic pottery in the second Intermediate Period in the central zone, that blue circle is. And we also have at Tel El Maskuda a Asiatic cemetery. So there's actually a cemetery where they buried, where the Asiatics were buried. And then during the New Kingdom, suddenly the Asiatics disappear. They'll go away. By the way, she said she's not a Christian, by the way, but she just responded to what she sees. It looked to her like these different clans of shepherds, nomadic shepherds, the pastoralists that kind of move around in this central zone during the Second Intermediate Period. She thinks that they were all probably from the same family, different clans, all from the same family. That sounds to me an awful lot like what we would expect the Hebrews to look like when they came with their flocks and herds. But we'll kind of keep our mind on that. But this frontier fortress during the Second Intermediate, early 18th dynasty, remember they built this frontier fortress here. Asiatics disappear. We don't have them anymore. They've left. Maybe they left with the Hyksos. We don't know what happened to them. They disappeared, and Pithom began to be built as a frontier fortress and a supply city for the military. By the way, it was strengthened during the 19th dynasty as well under Ramses. So no matter which king was king of the Exodus, no matter which time period was the Exodus event, it was also being built at that time as well. Later on, during the Babylonian period, the late period in Egypt, the city of Pithom was reused. The blocks were reused, the Tel Maskud, like I mentioned a minute ago, and that's what they were kind of found there. So when we're trying to figure out where the Hebrews lived, with that kind of a background in our mind, a starting point for the Exodus, we know that they left from either a place named Ramses or Ramesses, and it's either a land or a city. Let me show what I mean. In Exodus 12:37, it says, "Then the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot besides children." So the starting point for the Exodus is the city, is a place called Ramesses. So is it a city or is it the land? We know where the city was. The city was Ramesses here. Was that where they left? Well, let's consider the two. On the right-hand side, you have Exodus 1:11, which is the supply city, Pithom and Ramesses. And on the left, you'll see from Genesis 47:11 that Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them by possession of the land of Egypt and the best of the land and the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh commanded. So there's actually a city named Ramesses, and there's actually a land named Ramesses. So where did they leave from when they left? Well, let's look at that Genesis 47 text a little bit more. The Genesis 47, verse 5 through 6, the first part of 6 says, "Then Pharaoh spoke." Well, in Genesis 47:11, Joseph did as Pharaoh commanded. All right. And then in Genesis, in verses 5 and 6, it says, say to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you." Well, in Genesis 47:11, he gave them possession in the land of Egypt. So he followed the command of the Pharaoh, and it said, "Have your father and brothers dwell in the best of the land." And he let them dwell in the best of the land. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And it says in 47:11, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh commanded. That means that the land of Goshen and the land of Ramesses is the same place with two different names. Goshen is an Asiatic name. Ramesses is an Egyptian name. But it's two different names of the exact same location. In fact, we only see the land of Ramesses mentioned, the spelling, the spelling here and the spelling from when they journeyed here. It's spelled with the same kind of symbol. These are vowel pointings. The supply city in Exodus 1:11 has a dash, which is an A sound. This is an E sound. And so this vowel pointing was a late addition. It was done during the 8th to 10th centuries AD in Tiberias by Jews who were trying to keep track of the pronunciation. The pronunciations are being lost. So they wanted to make sure they keep the pronunciations as they understood them at that time. And they understood at that time that the pronunciation of the city of Ramesses was different than the land of Ramesses. And Exodus 12:37 has the same pronunciation as the land. So it's spelled the same way. So, and that makes a lot more sense. It makes sense that they left from the land. There was quite a lot of them at that time. And they wouldn't have been living in the city. They built the city. They were building the city for the Egyptians. They weren't building it for themselves. So it makes sense that they were living in the land of Ramses, and that's where they left during the Exodus. So, but that clears it up a little bit. It gives us an idea of where they left. It wasn't from the city. It was from a land. And we know that has to be somewhere between the cities. So it has to be somewhere here, probably. This land of Ramses, by the way, it's near. So if Joseph was here during the second intermediate period, for example, it's near, it's uphill, it's in the same place. I have trouble thinking that maybe Joseph was in Egypt during the Middle Kingdom, because that's not listed. And if they weren't living there, the land of Goshen was actually here at the Exodus. So that makes it a little bit difficult for me to kind of see that. It seems like this is probably where it's at, somewhere in this area, near and uphill from Avaris during that time period, near Pithom and Ramses. So I think they lived in the Wadi Tumilat, the land of Goshen. And where in the land? I think when they came in, they probably lived where Carol Redmond found those pottery of the Asiatics, and they probably were burying their ancestors, the people who were dying. Remember, it said in the process of time, Joseph and all that generation died. They had to be buried in cemeteries, and they have an Asiatic cemetery right there, Telemaskura. That makes sense to me that when they came in during the second intermediate period, they were living there. And then when they were put into slavery, they were moved to the west, still the land of the Wadi Tumilat, still the land of Goshen Ramses, but they're here. They could have built these two supply cities by living in that area. That's what I think probably happened. And in the 19th dynasty, it'd be the same thing. So either way it works. So it doesn't help us one way or the other. It'd be the same geography for the 18th or 19th dynasty. It said also in the event of war that they might join our enemies and fight against us. Remember, Ahmoses had fought the Asiatics, who were living at Avaris, the city that eventually would have the city called Ramses later on. The city would have this supply city here. They were fighting those people who lived there. And it makes sense that they would be nervous. If the Hebrews didn't leave, they obviously did not leave Egypt when the Hyksos left Egypt. That would make sense that why we don't have the pottery. They didn't leave with the Hyksos. They actually got moved into slavery because they stayed there. But the Egyptians were scared. What if these people that were favored by the Asiatics that we just got kicked out of Egypt, what if they, while we're fighting them, by the way, in Palestine, they were still fighting them over there, what if they joined up against us and now they're behind us in the same way the Nubians were earlier during the Great Hyksos battle? Maybe that would have the same scenario and they were nervous about that, so they put them into slavery. That kind of explains that. But my question is, why didn't they leave? If they were friendly with the Hyksos, why didn't they leave? I mean, sure, they were in a great land. It was perfect. Plenty of, by the way, there's pools of water there for watering your flocks. There's plenty of grass for the flocks and herds. No taxes because you're exempt. It seems like a very nice place to stay. They should have left. Why didn't they leave? Sometimes we get comfortable in life and we don't go when God tells us to go. I don't know if God told them to go or not. I don't know. But we know that God knew they weren't going to leave because he prophesied that they wouldn't. But God fixes our mistakes. That's my takeaway from that scenario. We don't always know what's best to do in life, and sometimes we make mistakes in life. But God is a God who fixes those mistakes, and he took them eventually out of Egypt. Where do they live? I think they live somewhere in the Wadi Tumilat, probably the western zone at the time of the Exodus. And that's why I don't think they saw the pyramids at Giza. I don't think they also were living down below that at Lish during the Middle Kingdom. It's too far away from the land of Goshen. It would be impossible for them to come all the way down there and do anything with bricks. I don't think they had anything to do with building the pyramids either. So that kind of answers the question from last night. I don't think they were even close to the pyramids. They probably wouldn't have seen the pyramids. I don't think slaves had vacation days. I don't think they had opportunities to travel 100 miles or so to go over there and see the pyramids. So I think they just stayed in that area. They probably wouldn't even know the pyramids existed unless they heard about them otherwise. Why did they name the city and the land after a king named Ramses? And what does that have to do with the Exodus? Well, we're going to answer that question tomorrow night. So I'll open it up now to some questions if you have any.
All right. Thank you very much, Doctor. Just one request, and you don't have to follow this request. It actually is so much better when we can see people. That way we don't feel like we're talking to our screen. Now, you don't have to. I realize that some of you don't want to be seen, and that's okay. And so I just want to let you know that we would like to see you. And so if you could, we would love to see you guys. Now, I'll start the question just because I don't know, that just makes people loosen up a little bit. Did Joseph then act if Thebes or Karnak was the capital at one point? Did Joseph live in Karnak? Did Joseph actually go all the way down to Aswan if he was the second ruler? And when he went up, does that mean he had a palace somewhere all the way down south? If most of the capital cities were down south.
Yeah, so it really depends on when you put Joseph in Egypt. If he was there during the Middle Kingdom, he would have been at Lisht, there near the Fayum. That purple dot I had a little earlier, a little bit further down.
Yes.
And he would have had a palace. Yes, he would have definitely been a palace. Whether he would have traveled or not, if it was during the Middle Kingdom, he would have traveled, but there wasn't a capital at Thebes in the Middle Kingdom. So he may have traveled to see the sites at some point and maybe survey the land. Maybe when he's assessing it for his duties during the famine, remember he gained a lot of the property in trade for food.
Right.
Maybe he would have done that and traveled a lot and seen different places. I don't think he came in during the Middle Kingdom. I think he came in during the Second Intermediate period, during the Asiatic period. And the reason why I think so, to a large extent, is that the Bible talks about him being in a chariot, having the second chariot. But chariots weren't even in Egypt until the Second Intermediate period. So during the Middle Kingdom, there weren't chariots. It also talks about horses being traded for food during the famine, but there weren't horses in Egypt until the Second Intermediate period. So I don't think the Middle Kingdom is even an option for Joseph. Some of my colleagues put him there, but they don't have a good explanation for the chariot and horses. I think it works much better if he came in during the Asiatic time period, because remember, he was taken as a slave in Potiphar's house. Potiphar, the Bible goes out of the way to mention that he was an Egyptian. He was the bodyguard. He was the captain of the bodyguard of Pharaoh. But Potiphar's wife was also very looked like she was an upward climber. And Joseph was obviously somebody who's going someplace. I think he was connected racially, ethnically to the rulers, and she thought of maybe attaching herself to him on his way up. That's a theory of mine. But if you think about it later on, when Joseph comes has his brothers come and eat, he's not eating with the Egyptians. He's eating by himself. The Egyptians are eating by themselves. And that would be very odd unless he was not an Egyptian himself. And also, he was Asiatic. So when the brothers came, they didn't recognize him. It had been a number of years, but he still was Asiatic. Different skin color, you can't hide that. So it would have been very odd that he would have been a ruler at the time, an Asiatic ruler. But it wouldn't have been odd at all if Asiatics were ruling. So that would make a lot of sense to me that he was at that time period. It matches a lot of other things. And so I think Joseph was at Avaris. I think it was Second Intermediate period. And there were two capitals, but remember the capital of Thebes was held by the Egyptian princes. It wasn't held by him. So unless he went down during the famine, during the King Cayenne, maybe it was during that famine, that he got all control of all of Egypt. Maybe that was the time he got all control of Egypt because of the famine. Maybe Joseph could have gone and seen Thebes, but he wouldn't have had a palace there. It would have been in the north, someplace.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't. So Moses then would be a little bit more in Karnak, especially since Hatshepsut had a temple there. I'm guessing Hatshepsut also had a palace there. So Joseph probably would be more in Avaris, and then Moses would actually be someone who would have had access to the palaces at Karnak.
But Moses absolutely would have been everywhere in Egypt. Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Talk a little more about that tomorrow night. We'll talk about the Pharaoh of the Exodus, and it'd be more clear. But absolutely, Moses would have been everywhere in Egypt. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
I know we're late in the game because we weren't here last night, but I was just curious. When you said that they wouldn't have seen the pyramids. How old are the pyramids? How far back do those go?
Sure. Yeah. Last night we talked a little bit about that. The pyramids, actually, the big ones at Giza, the ones that we usually talk about, those are Old Kingdom pyramids. Those are some of the first ones built. It's possible Moses would have seen them for sure, but the Hebrews wouldn't have lived anywhere close to them, and they were built long before they got there. No one really suggests that the Hebrews had anything to do with the Giza pyramids. The only pyramids that the Hebrews could have possibly built would have been the ones at Lisht. If they're in the Middle Kingdom, there were some pyramids in the Middle Kingdom built at Lisht, and so if that was the capital and Joseph was there, it would require the Middle Kingdom to have put them into slavery, not the New Kingdom. But we don't have any evidence of there being large-scale slavery at that time. So that doesn't seem to even match up either. So it seems like the Hebrews lived only in the north. It's possible during the time of peace that some of them could have traveled some, maybe for trading of some kind, but they were shepherds, they weren't merchants. And so it's not, people didn't travel a lot like we do today. They just didn't move around a lot. In fact, we were just reading in Deuteronomy, I think it's 21, where somebody gets killed and you don't know who killed that person. And the law was whatever city they're closest to, they're the ones responsible. That law makes sense because people didn't move a lot from their city. You just lived where you lived and you didn't travel a lot. And so that's why that law was more fair. But the same thing back then. So it's not possible. It's not likely they would have seen the pyramids. They could have. They almost certainly did not build the pyramids. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, welcome to the program. Pastor, I think you recorded last night. So if they want to go back and watch it,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, we definitely do. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I still have, because one of the pictures I have in my head was Moses was actually near the places where the Hebrews were working, because that's when he saw the two Hebrews fighting.
Right.
Now, when I was in Egypt, we took a felucca ride to some of those palaces. Now, we weren't able to get in, but even those, because this is the first time we're going to go to Goshen, that's pretty far from those palaces to Goshen. It doesn't seem like Moses can, I don't know, take a horse ride all the way to where those Hebrews are working. So I'm trying to figure out where the palace was. How could that actually happen for Moses to be raised in the palace and somehow, be also where the Hebrews were building stuff?
Well, remember, so whether it's 18th or 19th dynasty, it doesn't really matter, because at least for this topic, it doesn't matter. It will matter tomorrow night, but it doesn't matter right now. Whether it's Tel Adaba or Tel Kantir, that was the northern capital, and it was being built in both of those time periods. There were buildings being built at that time. So at Tel Adaba, when those supply cities began to be built with mud, by the way, they were built with mud brick. They were built in the city. The palace was also there as well. So Moses would have been in the palace, and he could have just traveled across the city and seen his brethren building those. Or he could have gone all the way down into the land of Goshen and gone over to Pithom, taken a chariot. He certainly could have done that, and seen them building Pithom and saw the same thing kind of happen. So it could have happened. We don't know which city they were building, which city he visited and saw that occurrence, but it was happening in one of the two cities. But if it was in the capital city, he could have just almost looked out his window and seen them working, because they'd have been right out there.
I see. Glad you wrote a question on the chat. It says, do you interact with Egyptian scholars? What do they think of the story of Exodus? And is it something you can talk about with them? I think part of the history of that question is there are some Egyptian scholars that are pretty sensitive about this whole thing about Hebrews, embarrassing their pharaoh, et cetera, or because some scholars actually believe that the Israelites built the pyramids, and some of the scholars or even the guides that we've had said there's no way they could do that. This is all Egyptians, kind of like what you said last night. So have you interacted with Egyptian scholars, and have you had people who were friendly towards the story of Exodus and people who were against it?
Yeah, so the Egyptian political situation, we talked a little bit about that last night in the sensitivity, but Egyptians, there's mostly Muslim Egyptian scholars, but there are also Christian mostly Coptic church Christian Egyptian scholars. And obviously the Coptic church, they're not against the Bible at all. Obviously they're in favor of it. So they're very easy to talk to about it. They like, we sometimes, I think, mix up the Egyptians a little bit too much. Most Egyptians are secular people. They don't care one way or the other. And a lot of the scholars really don't care one way or the other. My experience with archaeologists has actually been a very positive one. Most archaeologists are not interested in the Bible at all. They're interested in whatever they find. And if you find something in the ground and it existed, then it existed. If the Hebrews were in Egypt, great, they were in Egypt, but we don't, I mean, they haven't excavated the areas where we were talking about tonight. So they haven't found any evidence really of them. There actually is some evidence. We'll talk about that some more in coming up nights, but they're not against the idea. They're just scholars. The archaeologists aren't against the idea generally. They just don't talk about it because it's not really on their radar. They don't care about the Bible. They care only about what the archaeology says. And so, yeah, so I've had many conversations with both Christian scholars, Egyptian scholars. I've had many conversations with just secular Egyptian scholars. Even some of my Muslim friends, they talk about openly. I was actually at someone's house. By the way, the best hospitality I've had is by my Muslim friends there. I stayed actually. Rais Mahmoud, he's the one in charge of the entire temple complex at Karnak. And just so you understand what that means, there's three big sites in Egypt. There's the Giza pyramids and the Saqqara area. There's Karnak temple complex and the Valley of the Kings. And so the top three, those are the top three. And Karnak is probably, and without a doubt, among the archaeologists, Karnak is the best one because there's so much data there. And Rais Mahmoud is in charge of that. And I stayed at his house. His family's friends of mine. And of course, he's very much a Muslim, but he doesn't mind talking. His whole family's in the business, and they don't mind talking at all about it. It's kind of a fun topic to talk about. So I've actually found them quite open. They're not against it as much as sometimes we think they are. Now the government itself isn't so keen to talk about it. They don't want to build that up, but the people themselves aren't so bad about it.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions?
But by the way, you did mention the guides. Guides are hit or miss. Sometimes the guides are very, very bad. I mean, they don't. They tell you whatever they think you want to hear as Christians, and it's not always good information. But once in a while, you get some really good, honest ones that will tell you. Sometimes we just don't know the answer, and that's the ones you want to listen to.
Right.
See what we get.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, if there's no other questions, again, thank you so much for everybody. Okay, I'm sorry. There might be one more question. Go ahead.
I'm just curious, how do we know that they were building cities, that the Israelites were building cities?
Because Exodus 1:11 says they were building supply cities, and so that's why. And the supply part is the probably the military supply. There is no other city that we know of that stored just built things for just storage in general. They had to be for a purpose, and because there's two of them at that time, and for the military, it seems to fit really well. So I think Exodus 1:11 is why we know.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, again, we would like to invite you back tomorrow. I know that it's neat to know that there were proof that the Hebrews were there. This is the first time I've even heard that they could have left. They should have left. And so this is the first time I'm hearing that, and that actually makes sense. If the Hyksos got taken out, maybe they should have seen that as a warning that these people aren't going to like us. But like you said, God always fixes our mistakes, and we thank God for that. So again, we invite you tomorrow, 6:30, same time. And right now, if you would, I'd like to invite you to bow your heads in prayer and thank God for this evening. Oh, I'm going to stop recording.